Welcome to the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals video on Teraphobia and the fear of monsters. And amongst the many list of phobias that can exist, this is by and far an interesting one, to say the least, and one that we usually just see more so with children. But these fears can persist throughout life. And if we simply just go to social media, we're always able to see certain videos that will entertain the imagination about the existence of mythological monsters that exist in various parts of the world or may exist within the woods or the forest or the mountains. And a lot of this persists into pushing the idea that these fears are justified within themselves. But why monsters? Why, in particular, are some individuals obsessed and fearful of monsters in themselves? And that basically goes to our root of being human. Human imagination is always looking for explanations about the unknown. And in many ways, monsters represent the unknown of what we fear deep down, and they become manifestations of that. Monsters can become archetypes for human symbolisms of evil in itself. Our subconscious and collective human anxiety literally expressed and exposed. Also, representations of human corruption and identifying that corruption can be seen in the idea of monsters. And I think also the idea of monsters are important as a way to deter individuals to stay away from certain dangerous places within itself. So I would like to emphasize that this belief, this phobia even for some, is far different than religious beliefs that correlate with evil and demons. This falls out from more than merely a religious dogma. It goes far deeper, more into the realms of folklore, myth, and in sometimes a severe state of psychosis itself. And this doesn't mean that psychosis doesn't correlate with religious beliefs in demons, but there is more so a cultural, social, and theological difference, I think, between the spiritual, theological dogma of demons versus monsters. Although the same phobia can exist at a spiritual level when spirituality becomes pathological in itself. So we naturally have a fear of the unknown. And when we start to have fears of creatures that can harm us, that don't exist, that rational fear becomes an irrational one. And any type of irrational fear is a type of phobia. And obviously, teraphobia responds to this irrational fear of monsters that we usually see with children. So these primal fears can become strengthened, though, by stories, folklore, individuals who express that they've seen this or they've seen that. Media intake, especially on social media, watching a very scary movie before bed, and also just the trauma, maybe as young children, seeing someone literally have a meltdown over thinking that they saw something. And this has a negative effect on an impressionable mind, which can lead to the fear of the dark or the unknown. Can have children naturally thinking, is there something under my bed? Or is there something in my closet? So whether this fear is learned, handed down from parents telling stories or campfire stories, or whether it is witnessed vicariously, the irrational belief in monsters nonetheless can take hold of many young children, and if not left treated, can manifest during and throughout adulthood. So how many times do we see parents use maybe scary symbols to tell children to stay out of the woods. And instead of telling the child it's for this reason, maybe they'll say, well, if you go down there, the witch lives in the woods. And we don't want the child to go into the woods because we know they can be harmed. There could be an animal in the woods that could harm them. But instead of giving a rational reason, sometimes parents can give an irrational one to force obedience through fear itself. And because of this, children can develop these types of fears, especially with their imagination itself. And through this also comes superstition. And what about the parents who do believe in some of these superstitions? So you have many individuals who live in Appalachia that they believe that if they hear something in the woods, to ignore it because you don't want to have that manifestation come towards you. Or they believe in locking all the doors and everything. All good practices, but they are being strengthened through an irrational fear. And that passes down from generation to generation itself, causing this type of phobia. So, what are some physical, emotional, and social effects on children who experience teraphobia? Well, physically, individuals can experience a fear reaction with fight or flight. And this can obviously cause unnecessary stress on the body if one is constantly living in fear. We have enough things to worry about in life that are legitimately threatening to our existence. We don't need to be making up things that aren't there. It can lead to insomnia, nightmares, and night terrors, especially if digested the concepts and the images late at night. It can lead to an intense level of anxiety. It can also be in existence a certain fear of places and an avoidance of those places. And sometimes that might be a good thing, but we want to avoid certain places that are unsafe for rational reasons, not irrational ones. It can also lead later to life to isolation. Individuals isolate from certain individuals and groups and from social groups and society just because of these types of fears. It can lead with children, especially to a clinging behavior in which the child clings to the parents or the caregiver. There also is an increase in ritualistic behavior. And by ritualistic, I don't necessarily mean religious, but superstition. A superstitious behavior that we have to do this or we have to do that. The blinds need to be down at a certain hour. The doors need to be locked at a certain hour. Again, safe, but for the wrong reason. Or we can't do this or we can't do that. We have to put a particular type of substance around the doorstep or above the window. These things start to develop out of fear of these mythological monsters or beasts. And of course, this can lead to deeper psychosis as the person travels deeper and deeper into their mindset of this irrational fear itself. So, how can we help these individuals? Obviously, we're entering into a therapeutic, empathetic relationship with them. And to simply say there's no monsters in a direct, mean way can really hurt. So, we want to discuss it and we want to help these clients cognitively distinct between real and unreal things, rational versus irrational fears. We want to validate their fear. We don't want to dismiss it as stupid or foolish. We want to validate it and make the person not feel ashamed. But we want them to better understand the emotion of fear and how it's tied to the particular trigger. We also want to see what is the root cause. Where did this originally come from? Was it handed down? Is it a story they heard? Was it an experience that they had as a young child that through their memory has kind of cognitively distorted what really occurred? And we need to help them come to an understanding together, not forcing it or coercing it on them, but for them to come to the conclusion that there's other explanations for these things that they fear that do not exist within itself. So ways to do so is through gradual exposure to these fears to help alleviate the triggers. For many, this is traumatic. And whether or not the monster exists under the bed or not, it might have created a trauma response and have unresolved trauma lingering with this phobia. So, exposure therapy of EMDR, meditation, CBT, finding strength in something that is bigger than themselves, if they're spiritual, an idea of God. We also, with children especially, want to give positive reinforcement for their fears. Children sometimes can be afraid to be alone in a room, and they are afraid of a monster under their bed, and they might need some comforting because of this types of clinging. So we don't necessarily want to traumatize and re-traumatize over and over by forcing a child to sleep alone and saying there's nothing in here, you're going to sleep alone, you're going to deal with this. Instead, we want to be patient and show empathy and show rewards with positive reinforcement for being brave for one full night, or picking a particular night in advance when the child can be alone, or putting a nightlight, or giving them some type of spiritual presence that they can look at that makes them feel stronger. So, kind of like symbolically Dumbo's magic feather, something that gives them a symbol that they're safe. And through patience and not just pushing a child away, but gradually, progressively, in phases, the child will eventually learn that there's nothing really there, that it's an irrational fear, and they will begin to find resilience and strength within themselves for it. So it's just not something that we can tell to a child, get over it. That will only re-traumatize. So when dealing with children with teraphobia, it's a process. It's a collaborative process with parents, and sometimes the issue could be with what they're digesting, what they're told, or parenting that has good intentions but lead to bad results just simply because they want to protect, but they're using fear as a way to do so. We are the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals. We offer a wide variety of behavioral health certifications. Our link is below, as well as our phone number at 330-652-7776. And our email is info@aihcp.org. I'd like to thank you for listening and have a good day.